Prime Minister John Key, good morning.
Good morning. Happy Valentine's Day, of course.
I wish you hadn't mentioned that after the picture in the paper the other day was
Oh, yes.
you getting kissed.
Yeah, I know. Well, apparently I've been voted the sexiest politician again, 4 years in a row. What can I say?
Yes, but who was doing the voting?
I know.
Where did they take it on Sunday?
Yeah, exactly. Possibly.
All right. Let me
Anyway.
start with Contact Energy.
Yep.
Here we have the largest company in the country, the majority shareholding owned by an Australian company, Orion, which itself upsets some people, planning to lay off about 100 people in order to save, as part of a plan to save something like $40 million.
Yep.
Now, the problem, as I understand it, is that the demand for electricity has dropped, and the suggestion is it doesn't look like rising anytime soon, the demand I'm speaking of. Now, that of itself is a problem, but then the second part of that, and the more important part of that for you, I would think, is downselling the energy companies in New Zealand. That does something to your value.
Yeah, I haven't seen the details really too much of Contact. I mean, I saw a little bit on the news last night. So I wouldn't want to sort of second guess what's happening in behind the scenes there. And electricity is a very complex issue because some of the electricity producers have a largest proportion of their assets in hydro, and some of them are more in fossil or fuels, coal or gas or whatever. And so what happens is it depends on the conditions. Sometimes it'll be very dry and a meridian, for instance, will have a bad result because there's no water, or other times it'll be too much. So there are a lot of different factors, and goodness knows what they're doing in terms of restructuring. But overall, as the economy grows, it generally uses more power. That's the correlation. Even though people get more efficient, generally they use more. We're on a growth path. We've been growing for the last 3 or 4 years. So I'm a little perplexed by that. Maybe they think their overall cost base is too high. In terms of the mixed ownership model, which is Genesis, Mighty River and Meridian in that space, we'll find out a bit more from the Supreme Court, hopefully by early next week. But I mean, the simple bottom line is that yes, they're involved in that sector, and people would need to consider that. But I certainly see the New Zealand economy growing and demanding more electricity over time.
Like I say, you got Tiwai Point that's dropping off.
Okay, well, so Tiwai Point's a very different issue. So what's happening is it's
still a reduction in the energy demands of the country.
Not necessarily. I mean, so in the case of Tiwai Point, you're assuming that the owners, which is Rio Tinto, would walk away from that asset. So the first thing is their contract is rock solid for 3 years. So yes, if they chose not to take that power, they would have to pay for that, and that would be very expensive. They are looking to sell that asset they have for some time. They've been looking to sell their aluminium assets around the world. It also produces arguably the most pure electricity in the world. And so it would be a very expensive exercise to close Tiwai Point down and mothball it, because you'd then be trying to sell an asset that's not up and running, and you'd have to pay for 3 years of power. And by the way, it wouldn't necessarily flow into the national grid and reduce prices in the short term, because it's Manapori's power, which is where it's sourced from, isn't easy to get into the national grid in the short term. So yeah, it's an issue, and we'll work our way through it, but I want to overstate that.
All right. So the second part, or the next part of my line of questioning with regard to this, is that, I'll just put it to you simply, that you realise that there are other methods of power production which will be introduced into the marketplace in the not too distant future. And I'm talking about globally, different ways of producing power, even reducing it down to individual units, on homes separately, etc., factories producing their own, basically, or communities doing it. So your idea of selling down this is not a statement, this is a question. Your idea of selling down the power companies is a smart one, because they're not going to be worth what they're worth now in the future.
Okay, so I'm in very dangerous territory if I start getting into either advising people whether they should buy shares or not, or opining on the value of a company or not, because the financial markets regulations preclude me from doing that.
Of course.
But let me say this, in good faith, we are not proposing to sell 49% of those companies because we do not believe that they would present value to the Crown in the future. It's because we believe that we can enjoy the same benefits we do as the owner by owning a majority share but not 100% of the shares, and we can use those funds to buy, build other assets which we think would be of benefit to New Zealand. So it's not a kind of cunning plan to offload those shares on unsuspecting New Zealanders.
Would you consider buying shares in one of the companies?
I can't answer that question because, A, that would be tantamount to giving financial advice. Secondly, you're probably aware that I have a blind trust, and so I don't personally buy any shares for obvious reasons. And thirdly, the cabinet rules would preclude me from doing that in the first at least 3 months post a float. So I'm kind of not in that space.
So if I said, considering that you could be out of politics, at any
Well,
stage,
one day I'll be out of politics.
if you were out of politics, would you? And I guess my guess is you go back to answer one.
Yes, which is to say, I just can't offer you advice on that. But there is no. If the question is, there's a cunning plan and we don't think electricity demand will be where it is and there'll be all these alternatives, I probably don't accept that in day one, because the long-term graph of correlation between energy use and economic growth, they're highly correlated. The more you grow, the more you need energy. Yes, we're becoming more efficient. Yes, you're right, there are other sources. But that will all come into the mix, and all that would do is stop a Meridian or a Genesis or a Contact having to build more generation capacity of their own.